Let's recap on paper what we've done so far with our Vue.js component. We started with a number line, which we also called an axis, and for our first horizontal axis we called it the x-axis. Then we decided that we could think of 0 as being the center of our number line. But we also allowed the possibility that x could be other numbers like 1, 2, -1, -2, and so on. And this is something we didn't do with our Vue app, but it is common to make a table of x values that we're particularly interested in. In this case, I'm saying that I'm interested in the cases where x equals 0, 1, or -2. And these can be any numbers, of course, depending on the context. I just picked these because they were easy examples that were staring at me. Once we got our x or horizontal axis working the way we wanted, we added a second axis which was vertical, and we called this the y-axis. This creates a two-dimensional plane where previously we had a one-dimensional number line. One thing this means is that in order to identify a single point, we're going to need two coordinates now, one in the direction of x and one in the direction of y. So let's say we wanted to identify the point whose x coordinate is 1 and whose y coordinate is 2. We would denote this point as an ordered pair, and that would look something like this. The convention we'll use is that the x coordinate will be written first and the y coordinate will be written second. And like we did with our number line, we can also make a table of x-y coordinate pairs that we're interested in. In this case, I'm noting that 1, 2 is an ordered pair that I'm interested in. Next, let's graph the point whose x coordinate is -2 and whose y coordinate is -3. Again, I'm notating this as an ordered pair, and I can also write this ordered pair in the table. When we have a set of points in the plane, like we do in this example, we can refer to that as a relation. And this is a word that's going to underlie a lot of what we're going to be doing next when we dive back into our Vue app. Another term that will play a big role in our Vue app is what we're going to call a curve. And we can think of this as a special type of relation whose points form a continuous path through the plane. For our purposes, we'll be interested in curves that can be defined by equations, such as, here's a famous example, the equation y equals x squared. Let's think about what's going on here in the context of what we now know about the xy plane. Let's start out by drawing our two axes. And let's get a table going of x and y values that we're interested in. A good place to start is typically going to be where x equals 0, so we're going to start there right now. And since we have y defined in terms of x, what we can do is just say, well, when x equals 0, y is going to be equal to 0 squared, which is also 0. And this means we have a point on our graph of y equals x squared at 0, 0, which we also call the origin. Okay, so another easy x to use is going to be x equals 1. And when x equals 1, we have y equals 1 squared, which is also 1. And again, this means we have an ordered pair on our graph at 1, 1. Now when x equals -1, we also have y equal to 1, and that's because -1 squared is equal to -1 times -1, which is equal to 1. So this will give us our third point on our graph here. So when x equals 2, y is going to be equal to 2 squared, which is 4. And to keep things nice and symmetric, let's do x equals -2 as our last one. And this is going to give us 4 for the same reason that -1 squared gives us 1. You just have two negatives canceling out, and it's the same as the positive number squared. And if we take it as a given that every point in between these sample points is going to behave in a continuous manner, then we can go ahead and connect these dots in order to form our continuous curve. And I'm adding arrows on both ends there to indicate that this is a curve that's going to go on forever in both directions. Here we are back in our project folder, and we're running our npm dev script, which is going to be serving up our app in the browser. And now that we've defined a relation as a set of points and a curve as a special type of relation, we're going to go ahead and start figuring out how we can build those concepts into our Vue app. Now we can already graph any ordered pair that we want just by typing in numbers. Like if we wanted to do 1, 3, we would just type in 1, 3, and our point would react accordingly. So any point that we want here, -2, -3 for example, is totally graphable. It just jumps around wherever we tell it to go. We could also add more points in if we wanted to. That would not be a problem. Let's go ahead and open up our main app file. And if we just duplicate this line and add in any point we want, let's say 3, -2. Then we have 2 points. One that's going to be bound to our inputs, and this other one here that's just been hard-coded in there. So we've just gone from a relation containing 1 ordered pair to a relation containing 2 ordered pairs fairly easily. And of course we could repeat this as many times as we wanted to get as many points as we wanted. But we're going to use the idea of a relation to act as a container where we're going to inject all those points so that the relation component is responsible for dealing with its own set of points. And one extremely cool thing that we can do now, which we hadn't considered before, is what if we took this input away, and instead of binding this to our y value, how about if we just display our y value? Since we want our y now to be determined as a function of x, just like we were doing when we graphed y equals x squared a second ago. So that's going to tell us what the computed value of y is. And then if we find our y value data property, let's just remove that and let's add a computed properties object here. And let's say that one of those should be called y value, and that it should return. Now in JavaScript, to do an exponent, we're going to use the math.pow function. And we're just going to say that it should compute this .x value to the second power. Okay, so let's save that and head back over to our browser. And if we change our x value here, we see that sure enough, this point's going to move in a parabolic shape, which is pretty awesome. And even if we go off the screen, let's say that we type in x equals 6, we see that our y is still displaying 36 there. So this looks promising, and then from there you could of course add any function that you wanted in here. So let's say instead of a power we wanted to do a sine wave. And we just say, okay, I want to make y equal to the sine of x. Well, we can head back over and there we go. Sine wave going back and forth, just tracing itself out along as we go. And even though this is tracing out the curve through the plane, it's not actually drawing the curve. So we might want to add something in there that will remember which points we've been to and then save those on the screen even after our active point moves away.